Open up the back and determine which side the vent will open. On a centre-vented jacket for men and women, the right goes underneath the left. This means you need the vent inlay on the underside, which is the right side if you think about which side the jacket will be worn on. For this method, we can cut the left side's vent inlay down so that it follows the rest of the inlay. The vent inlay on the right hand side we only want to be about 4 cm past the centre back line. We can cut it down to 5 cm or keep all of it and we'll fold it to the desired width later. Cut a piece of silecia or linen, depending on how stiff you want it, 4 cm wide and at least as tall as the vent. Line it up a little below the hem so that it also sits about 1.5 cm above the top of the vent and 1 cm over the centre back line. Baste it in place. Mark the top of the vent so that you know where to stop machining. We can machine the lining at the same time. Make sure that the centre back is marked at the top of the neck and cuts away towards the fold so that we can give it a pleat beyond the centre back. So right now I'm marking the centre back down to the vent. Marking out now a line to follow for the centre back pleat. Rejoining the centre on the waistline, the pleat can be between 1 cm to an inch from the centre back. We want to machine along these. To machine the back, machine from the top of the neck, back tacking at the top of the neck and the top of the vent. Machine on the centre back chalk mark we made. 90% of the time the centre back seam we machine on the line rather than the seam allowance. It just happens that the trouser pattern I make doesn't follow this rule. To machine the lining we need to back tack at the neckline but nowhere else. We want to finish at the top of the vent, but again, no back tacking. Remove the basting and press open the seam only down to the top of the vent. Place a small amount of silecia or linen behind the neck. Cut it flush with the top of the back. Baste it in place so that it covers the mark stitches. Trim the silecia again to 2 cm below the neckline and halfway down the inlay above. 1/2 centimeter from the mark stitches, prick stitch the silecia in place so that it will prevent the neck from stretching and to reinforce it. And it occurs to me that we can easily machine it to the neck inlay if we wanted. It's going to get covered later. Fold over the back piece that we put the silecia onto, the side that won't extend underneath the other. Fold it on the mark stitches and baste the edge down before giving it an iron. Only iron above the hem. When I iron the fold below the hem, I want to incline it away from the edge. Press a crease into the edge first. There will be fullness over the hem where the cloth is pivoted. 9 out of 10 times it will shrink in very easily when we press it. So you can see that it is bent below the hem, which makes it much more neat to fold upwards later when we put up the hem. I want my vent to have a 4 cm overlap today, so I measure 4 cm past the mark stitches on the left back piece as you'd be wearing it. Again, I want to baste it over this line. If you remember, the sample had one side mitered. That's because one side of the lining was a few centimeters from the edge. This time the lining will be millimeters from the edge, so I will just bevel the edge below the hem when I press it again. We need to cut the inlay a little above the vent so that we can turn it. In the sample video I had stretched and folded it along the seam, which you can do. I prefer to avoid cutting like that, so that if my jacket survives me, then its new owner has a lot of room to play. I just wanted to show the alternative method here. Iron the lining flat. Above the vent we can trim the excess lining beyond the stitching, otherwise it may become tight if there's too much when it's folded over. Fold the lining open and iron the crease from the neck of the top of the vent, ironing the pleat to the left, looking at the back from the bottom. Lay the lining in the jacket with the right sides facing outwards. Line up the top of the neck inlay and neck point, and the centre back seams. Baste them together starting around 10 centimeters below the neckline, basting it on the side that the pleat is folded so that it won't open. With regard to lining, I absolutely suggest making about 3 stitches to secure the thread. In my experience, 2 is just too little and they come undone. Although you could also knot the thread and that would also solve the problem. Baste down, giving it some ease as you go. It's not like the canvas, we don't want them taut together. Although that might not mean anything to you right now. Stop basting around 6 centimeters above the top of the vent. On the left side, being the side under the vent as the jacket is laid down, make sure the fabric is flat as you baste it, with some ease in the lining. Secure the thread next to where you started and baste horizontally to about halfway along the shoulder, securing the thread and then basting downwards. Finish at least 6 centimeters above the hem mark stitches. Fold over the still free lining to the other side to expose the centre back seam allowances. Where we cut to above the vent, cut the lining diagonally down towards it, getting close to the stitching without cutting it. Remove any stitching below the cut. Cut up the lining, giving the majority to the vent inlay side to release it onto the lining inlay of the fabric, though we still need at least 1 centimeter past the centre back on the left side of the vent. You should also be able to pull the fabric inlay over the left side lining as well. With the fabric cut, you should be able to fold the left side inwards to almost match the fabric. Baste it down to the top vent with a bit of ease and only going about halfway down. To clarify, we want the lining to sit a little bit away from the edge still. We don't want to see it from the outside. Move the top of the lining out of the way and lay the vent closed. You could trim a little of the vent inlay and its seam allowance. Baste the top of the inlay through the back of the fabric to hold it in place. Mark a horizontal line at the top of the vent and another line 1.5 centimeters below it. Then, from the top line at the top of the vent, draw a 4 centimeter line diagonally down to the other line, i.e. the width of the undervent at the top. Use some thread, either silk or waxed machine thread, and from the top of the vent, prick stitch down the diagonal line. Then either prick stitch back up, staggered to the first, or use a slip stitch to strengthen the bond between the inlay and the lining underneath it. I slip stitched in the samples, so I'm prick stitching it now. Once back at the top of the vent, prick stitch down the showing edge of the vent. Don't catch any lining going down though. Prick all the way to the bottom of the hem inlay. At this point, be sure to remove the basting from the top of the vent. Before sewing the lining down over the vent, I want to fasten the lining onto the other side of the back, so that I definitely won't pull too much away from the side seam. Baste it down the same way as we did the first time, ensuring we trap some ease in. Fold the lining right back down again, though you should give it a press if there are any strong creases, and you could also trim away some of the lining, because you only need 1 centimeter for the seam allowance over the inlay. Make sure the vent is laying properly again, and fold the top of the loose piece of lining under itself. We also fold the lining under itself at the top in either an incline or horizontally. Begin to baste it down on the centre back seam where we finished basting it last time, though only to the other lining. Continue only basting it to the lining until you get to the top of the vent, and baste it to the undervent. Only baste to about 6 centimeters from the mark stitches, so that we can fold up the hem later.